Seligman's also looking at positive health. With the Army, there's so much data, so there will be publications. We will be able to see the impact, not just on psychological health, but on physical health. There's a growing area on positive ageing. I did my first talk in a retirement village last year. There's so much interest around, particularly we have an ageing population. What can we do to maintain high levels of physical and psychological well-being? And positive communities. So a number of years ago, one of my colleagues from Wollongong Uni, Jeanette Gale, who's now the world leader in health coaching, I would say, she ran a community program at Kangaroo Valley. So again, she accessed funding, I think it was the Lions Club, and the whole of Kangaroo Valley, which is absolutely beautiful if you've ever been there, became involved in a positive health community project. It wasn't evaluated, but I've never forgotten that study because I think there's real opportunities. And in fact, Claudia, one of my colleagues here at the front table, we've been talking out in the West, and we're hoping to do something like the Wonderful West or Positive Parramatta or something like that. So we're looking for a community that's willing or, you know, potentially wanting to engage to look at a whole community positive psych intervention. At the University of Michigan, Chris Peterson ran a whole university-wide positive psych intervention. So all of the students had T-shirts and they could write, "What makes my life meaningful?" Every faculty gave a lecture on how their subject makes life meaningful. So it was, again, engaged the whole of the university campus and community. Public policy. So there's some publications that have been coming out. If you haven't heard, Seligman's also the thinker in residence at the University of South Australia. Jay Weatherill, the Premier, has apparently got behind this, and their aim is to make South Australia the wellbeing state of the world. Well, I'd like to see New South Wales give them a run for their money, to be honest. So if you know anyone or if you're influential, please keep talking and keep talking to us. Again, we will see more of this discussed at a community and societal level. And obviously positive workplaces, and that's really what today is about. Louise mentioned I have an honorary fellow at the Australian Institute of Business Wellbeing, which is the University of Wollongong, Sydney Business School. That's my alma mater, UOW, and a very innovative program headed up by Dr Lindsay Oates, who was my supervisor for my doctoral research, actually. And I guess their aim is to look at the combination of wealth and wellbeing, people and profits, and not just feeling good but functioning well. So positive psych, as I said, it's the science of wellbeing, it's the science of peak performance, it's the science of optimal human functioning. You can't not really consider this if you want your organisations to not just flourish but be high performance cultures as well. And why work? Well, if you look at that bell curve, if we're really serious, as Professor Felicia Huppert from Cambridge is, her dream is to move the bell curve slightly to the right. So we may not get everybody up to flourishing, but if we can move the bell curve slightly to the right, it's going to have a big impact on our society. So institutions like schools obviously are core institutions in our communities where we can roll out these programs, train teachers, train students that potentially can prevent mental illness into the long run, but also our workplaces. So how can we similarly engage people in talking about their mental health or their peak performance, if you like? And I guess the interesting thing is, again, Beyond Blue, Black Dog do great work, but there's still stigma. If there's a talk on depression, people tell, all right, what are you doing here? But if it's on positive psychology, oh, man, look, we've got 100. It was booked out this morning. Did you know that? 60 people on a waiting list. There's so much interest in it. But for me, it's always about the mental health. Yes, it's about peak performance, and I want to flourish and, be optimally functioning in my life. But for me, particularly as a clinical psych, it's about that prevention of mental illness, which is going to take over cardiovascular disease in terms of burden of disease on our communities. Why? Again, using workplaces, we can potentially prevent mental health. Languishing is also AKA presenteeism, which most of you will be familiar with, where people turn up. So they're not absent, they're there, but they're not really there. And the hot topic again, engagement and productivity. There's just so much research, and it intuitively makes sense to us. When we're feeling good, we function better, but there's science to prove that now. And again, this is a very small snapshot because I know I'm probably already close to time. We've got so much research, particularly on the benefits of positive emotions. They broaden our mindsets. If we put half the room into a negative mood state today and the other half into a positive and ask you to do a creative brainstorming exercise, the research tells us the positive mood state will come up with a statistically significantly longer list of ideas. So if you have to do any sort of creative task, you want to play table tennis. You know, you want to play little videos or tell jokes or whatever it is. You want to be able to engage people so that their thinking broadens. But if you've got to do detailed work, you don't want to be too happy, because the research tells us you miss mistakes if you're too happy when you're marking essays. So we also know there's increasing research on immune functioning. So it's not just our psychological well-being, it's our physical health. And most of us have known that for a long time, that our emotions affect our physical health. The area of psychoneuroimmunology is gaining increasing research. So we know negative emotions detract from our physical well-being. They can literally make you sick, and positive emotions add to our physical well-being. Lots and lots of research on this, on strengths use. Again, if it can be done well, increases energy. Again, we're all looking for increases in energy. Positive relationships, trump card of well-being. Most of us know if there's a problem in a relationship at work, it's going to significantly affect how you feel and also how you navigate, I guess, the networks at work as well. So unless you've been naturally born as a natural people person, which some people have, there are skills that you can learn, simple skills. Like one of the techniques Seligman's training the army in is called ACR, active and constructive responding. You can Google it and you'll find Shelley Gable talking about it. And it's how we respond when people share good news. So if you take a moment to think about, thank you, the last piece of good news that you had, and how did the person respond? You know, did they just say, oh, that's great, and change the subject? You know, or what are we doing Friday night? Compared to someone that said, that's really great, Suzy, I know you've worked really hard at that, you know, and they really suck the joy out of it. The research tells us that has a positive impact on our relationships. And actually, Scott, I hope you don't mind, but one of the teachers in the training, when we were introducing ACR, she said, oh, I feel really bad because I just did that. She said, one of the boys came up and said, Miss, guess what happened? And she goes, not now, I'm going to positive psychology training. She said, I feel really bad about it, you know. And I guess it just highlights we're so busy, and aren't we, and distracted. So being mindful, this is this mindful piece, the more mindful and conscious we are, we're more likely to stop and take a minute to say that's fantastic. I've got 2 minutes. So current state of play, there was a recent Journal of Positive Psychology article, in fact it was last month's, that was a review of positive psych at work. I'm happy to send it out to you if you like. And it pretty much said what I've been saying myself recently in my presentations. It's a fragmented literature. There's no integrated synthesis at this time. So there's many different fields and topics that fit under it. But there is, as I've shown to you today, some broad theoretical and scientific support for it. There's uptake of what are referred to as micro-interventions, so PsyCap, psychological capital, which looks at how do we build hope and optimism and self-efficacy and resiliency. So some of these micro-interventions are done 3-hour interventions in an organisation, and some of the preliminary studies are showing an impact on how people are feeling and on their productivity. And obviously some pioneering applications like Knox. We also have a few people from Lion. You probably know them as Lion Nathan. Nearly every person in the people and culture has been through my class at Sydney Uni, and they lionise positive psychology, and I would definitely say they are leaders in the application in the workplace here in Australia. I made a mind map up, and given I've probably got less than 1 minute now, I'm going to fly through it. So these are, again, you've got the slides. These are the areas that I would say fit under this umbrella of positive psych at work. Appreciative inquiry. Some of you will be familiar with that as an organisational change process, a very positive org change process. PosOrg Scholarship, that's University of Michigan, a unit dedicated to studying topics like gratitude and compassion and forgiveness in organisations, for example. Positive leadership, positive deviance, HQCs, high quality connections in the workplace. Strengths-based approaches, positive organisational behaviour, I mentioned psychological capital, applied positive psychology more broadly where we look at, I mentioned PERMA, emotions, relationships, engagement, meaning, accomplishment, positive institutions. Coaching. So I teach in the coaching unit. If you've got any sort of coaching program at your organisation, that is positive psychology. So coaching is applied positive psychology, but we need coaching cultures. It's not just for the senior executive. We need it filtered through. Mental toughness, I mentioned before. Corporate social responsibility in many ways connects into positive psych, and the strengths-based approaches, which Gallup have been doing for years, Seligman's character strengths, and Alex Lindley's Realise 2, which I've been running a number of strengths-based programs with, strengths-based recruitment. So I hope I haven't overwhelmed you, but again, you've got the slides. There's a lot to look at. Hasten slowly. So the headmaster of Knox Grammar, when we first met with them, and I guess, you know, I get quite excited and there's so much we can do, and he goes, hasten slowly, Susie. And so that would be my advice to you. Take your time, do your research, talk to people that have been implementing it. This is a really fantastic model, and as Scott talks about the program, this is pretty much what we did. We gave a basic introduction to what was POSED to the executive. We created a positive education team. We met with them for 6 months before we took it out to all the staff. And then we identified the early adopters, or your champions, and they were people spread across. It wasn't just the executive, it were influencers in the organisation. We then trained 200 staff, Scott will mention. In that training, people got fantastic creative ideas. So I'm not an expert in your organisation, or particularly in education, so we co-created positive psych initiatives together. And then we shared stories of success, and those stories then inspired other areas of the organisation to consider, oh, if it's working there, we might try it here. And then it was shared across, as I said, boundaries, and then tweaked. So we're learning as we go, which is what Scott will mention. So there's a lot of money spent on training. We know what people take away, less than 10%. We need to think about sustainable programs. So Knox has always been a commitment to a 3-year program at the very least, and I'm sure ongoing. Sean Acor, he was at Harvard with Tal Ben-Shahar, who taught positive psych at Harvard. He's doing a lot of work in organisations in the US. I haven't seen this in the peer review press, but he has been talking a lot about training that he conducted with managers at KPMG in the US, and a single, I think it was a 3-hour session, he's claiming had a significant impact on productivity and stress management. I'd still like to see some more rigorous evaluations, but I mean, it's just through the experience as a practitioner, for some people these programs are life-changing. It's the first time they've stopped to really think about some of these big questions that we ask. Read more, do your homework. There's a couple of key resources. And look, everyone's on the happiness bandwagon, so, and I just think, yeah, do your homework and make sure that you've got people that know what they're talking about. That's a little final quote. I won't read it because I know I'm already over time, but I guess it just speaks to utilising the workplace as a place where we can create flourishing societies. And thank you very much. I hope that was informative.